On my birthday, I stood in front of everyone with a black eye. The room went silent. My son said proudly, "It was my wife, she taught her some respect." My daughter-in-law smirked. Then my brother walked up to my son and said something that changed everything. But to understand how I ended up there, humiliated, bleeding dignity in front of my guests, you need to know what happened the morning before. You need to understand that this wasn't just about a bruise. It was about years of control, resentment, and a daughter-in-law who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to be removed. By the end of this story, you'll learn how a single act of violence unraveled a fortune, destroyed a marriage, and taught me the most painful lesson of my life, that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. If you're watching this video, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how many people enjoy my stories. If you've subscribed to this channel, congratulations. You'll keep getting our exciting new stories every day. The morning it happened, I was trying to be helpful. That's what I always did. Tried to smooth the edges, tried to make things perfect. My 60th birthday party was the next day, and I'd driven across town to drop off catering supplies at my son Liam's house. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on helping plan it, and I'd been so grateful. I thought maybe, finally, we were building something real. I parked in their pristine driveway, the one I'd helped finance, and knocked on the door with a box of linens in one hand and my late husband's sapphire necklace in the other. Chloe answered in yoga pants and a silk robe, coffee in hand, looking effortlessly beautiful the way she always did. I smiled, holding up the velvet box. "I thought you might like to wear this tomorrow," I said, opening it to reveal the necklace. Deep blue stones surrounded by tiny diamonds, an heirloom my husband had given me on our 20th anniversary. "It would look beautiful on you, darling." I meant it as a peace offering, a symbol that she was truly part of our family now, but the moment her eyes landed on it, I saw something flicker across her face. Disdain. She plucked it from the box with 2 fingers, examining it like it was a piece of costume jewelry from a thrift store. "It's dated," she said slowly, turning it in the light. "I was thinking something more modern. No offense, Alara, but your taste is a bit 1985. She handed it back with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt the sting, sharp and immediate, but I swallowed it. I'd learned to swallow a lot over the past 3 years since Liam married her. I forced a smile and set the box on the counter. "Well, it's yours if you change your mind," I said lightly, moving toward the kitchen island where she'd laid out the party plans. My eyes caught the menu: finger sandwiches, sliders, chips arranged on paper plates. For a moment I hesitated. I knew I should stay quiet, but the words came anyway. "The caterer you chose serves finger food on paper plates?" I kept my tone gentle, questioning. "I thought we were aiming for something a bit more elegant." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Chloe set down her coffee mug with a sharp clink. "This is exactly why Liam can't stand you," she said, her voice low and controlled. "You turn every kindness into a critique, every gesture into an opportunity to remind everyone that you know better. You can't help yourself, can you?" I felt my face flush hot. For years, I'd taken comments like this, veiled insults wrapped in concern, jabs disguised as observations. I'd apologized, backed down, swallowed my pride. But something in me cracked that morning. "I raised a man, Chloe," I heard myself say, my voice harder than I intended. "Not a puppet. And I won't apologize for caring about standards." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then she stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I could smell her perfume, something expensive and cloying. "You didn't raise a man," she said, her voice dropping to something almost intimate, almost venomous. "You raised a hostage." Before I could process what she meant, her hands were on my shoulders, and she shoved me backward with shocking force. My lower back slammed into the marble edge of the kitchen counter. Pain exploded up my spine, and I gasped, stumbling forward. That's when my head hit the corner of the countertop. I heard the crack before I felt it, a sharp, bright burst of pain that turned my vision white, then red, then black at the edges. I crumpled to the floor, my knees hitting the tile hard. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I touched my face and my fingers came away wet. Not blood, just tears I hadn't realized I was crying. I looked up at Chloe through the haze of pain, and she was standing over me, chest heaving, eyes wide but not with shock, with something else, satisfaction. She wasn't horrified by what she'd done. She was assessing it, the way you'd examine a finished painting to see if it achieved the desired effect. She crouched down beside me, her voice eerily calm now, almost soothing. "If you tell anyone," she whispered, so close I could feel her breath on my ear, "I'll make sure Liam never speaks to you again. He'll believe me. He always does." She stood, smoothed her robe, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, light and unhurried, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just assaulted a 60-year-old woman in her own home. I sat there on the cold tile for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, holding my face, feeling the swelling begin beneath my eye. The throbbing was dull at first, then sharp, then all-consuming. I pulled myself up using the counter edge, my hands shaking, and caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. There was already a dark bloom spreading across her cheekbone, purple-black like a storm cloud. I drove home in a fugue state, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just drove. When I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I sat there for 20 minutes, touching the swelling around my eye, pressing gently to see how far the damage spread. It hurt. God, it hurt. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the voice in my head, whispering the question I didn't want to answer. What have I done to deserve this? I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just kept giving, kept helping, kept trying, they'd remember I was still their family. I was wrong. Silence doesn't buy love. It only teaches people how much you'll tolerate. And as I sat there in my car, staring at my battered reflection in the rearview mirror, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Chloe hadn't lost control. The way she crouched beside me afterward, calm and collected, delivering her threat like a business negotiation. That wasn't rage, that was strategy. She'd wanted to hurt me, she'd wanted to send a message. And tomorrow, at my own birthday party, I'd have to decide, would I hide what she'd done, or would I let the world see? The mirror showed me the truth I'd been avoiding for months. My daughter-in-law didn't just dislike me. She wanted me gone. And my son, the boy I'd raised, sacrificed for, protected, was going to let her do it. I reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror so I couldn't see my face anymore. But I couldn't unsee what I'd learned. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that party wearing my bruise like a badge. And tomorrow, I'd discover whether I still had the strength to fight back, or if Chloe had already won. That night, I became an expert in deception. I sat at my bathroom counter with a bag of frozen peas pressed against my swollen eye, staring at my reflection and rehearsing lies. I tripped over the rug. No, too vague. I hit the cabinet door. Better, specific, believable, the kind of accident that happens to women my age. I practiced saying it aloud, watching my lips form the words, studying my face for any tells. The problem was, every time I said it, my voice cracked on the word accident, as if my body was rejecting the lie before it could fully form. I tried different variations, different tones, apologetic, embarrassed, matter-of-fact. None of them felt right. None of them felt like me. The ice wasn't helping. If anything, the bruise was spreading, darkening from purple to an ugly greenish black that crept from my cheekbone up toward my temple. I opened my makeup drawer, expensive foundations and concealers I rarely used, and began layering them on like war paint. But the more I applied, the worse it looked, cakey, obvious, a beige mask trying desperately to hide something monstrous beneath. I wiped it all off with shaking hands and stared at the woman in the mirror. She looked old, beaten, afraid. I didn't recognize her anymore. My phone buzzed on the counter and I nearly jumped. Mark's name lit up the screen. My older brother, calling from the airport. He was flying in from Seattle for the party, something he'd planned months ago. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail. But Mark had a sixth sense for trouble. He'd just keep calling until I picked up. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. There was a pause on his end. the kind that meant he was listening to more than just my words. "You sound strange," he said carefully. "Are you all right?" I looked at my reflection. The bruise, the fear in my eyes, the truth I wasn't ready to speak. "Just tired," I lied. "Big day tomorrow." Another pause. "I'll see you at 2. Get some rest, Alara." He hung up, and I was alone again with the woman in the mirror. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out the old photo albums I kept in the hallway closet, the ones I hadn't looked at in years. Page after page of Liam, gap-toothed at 7, gangly at 13, proud in his graduation cap, nervous on his wedding day. In every photo I searched his face for the moment I lost him. Was it when his father died and I became everything? Mother, father, provider, disciplinarian? Was it when I paid for his university but made him show me his grades each semester like he was still a child? Or was it later when I bought the down payment for his house but couldn't resist commenting on his career choices, his friends, his life? When did love become control? When did protection become prison? I started listing my sins aloud, my voice echoing in the empty house. I was controlling. Check. I made him feel small. Probably. I held the money over his head. Definitely. I didn't trust him to stand on his own. True, I said them like a confession, like naming them might somehow absolve me. But then another voice crept in, quieter and more insidious. "You deserved this." I stopped, my hands clenching the photo album. That voice sounded like Chloe. Like Liam. Like every criticism they'd ever lobbed at me, now internalized and weaponized. "No," I said aloud, to the empty room, to that poisonous voice. "No. No one deserves this." I said it again, louder. No matter what I'd done, no matter how controlling or critical or overbearing I'd been, I didn't deserve to be shoved into a counter. I didn't deserve to have my head split open. I didn't deserve to be threatened in my own son's kitchen. The realization hit me like a second blow. If I canceled the party, Chloe won. If I hid at home, nursing my wounds in private shame, she'd have succeeded in making me disappear. Liam would never have to face what his wife had done. They'd tell people I was ill, or tired, or, worse, that I was being dramatic, holding a grudge over some minor misunderstanding. The narrative would be theirs to control. But if I showed up, if I walked into that party with my bruise visible, undeniable, then everyone would see. They'd have to reckon with what happened. And Liam? Liam would have to choose. Would he defend his wife's violence, or would he finally see her for what she was? I walked back to the bathroom mirror and stared at my reflection one more time. This time without any makeup, without any ice, without any pretense. The bruise was a map of my failure. As a mother, as a woman, as someone who'd taught her son that love meant tolerating cruelty as long as it came from family. But it was also something else. It was proof, evidence, a truth that couldn't be argued away or reframed or dismissed. I touched it gently, wincing at the tenderness, and made my decision. Tomorrow I would walk into that party. I would not hide. If Liam and Chloe wanted to humiliate me, they'd have to do it in front of everyone I knew, and live with the consequences. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Liam's name. I should call him. I should tell him what his wife did. Give him a chance to apologize, to fix this before it became public. I hit the voicemail button and listened to my own voice, shaking but clear. "Liam, it's Mom. I need to tell you what happened yesterday, what Chloe did. Please call me back." I stared at the recording for a long moment, my finger hovering over the send button. Then I deleted it. He wouldn't believe me anyway. He'd take her side. He always did. And somewhere deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew the truth. Liam already knew. He might not have been there when it happened, but Chloe would have told him. And he'd chosen to do nothing. I was about to set my phone down when I saw it. A text message in my thread with Liam, sent 3 days ago, one I'd read but hadn't really absorbed at the time. "Mom, Chloe and I need space. Please respect our boundaries. We'll see you at the party." I read it again and then again, the words rearranging themselves into a new, horrible shape. This wasn't a random request. This was the groundwork. Chloe had been isolating me for weeks, little comments about how I was too involved, suggestions that I was overbearing, hints that Liam needed room to breathe. And Liam had gone along with it. That text wasn't about boundaries. It was about building a narrative, Alara is intrusive. Alara doesn't listen. Alara needed to be put in her place. They say you can't undo the past. But what if the past is the only thing that explains the present? I was a tyrant once. I won't deny it. After my husband died, I clung to control because it was the only thing that made me feel safe. I monitored Liam's life because I was terrified of losing him too. I criticized because I thought tough love would make him stronger. I was wrong. I see that now. But understanding my mistakes doesn't erase what was done to me. It doesn't justify Chloe's hands on my shoulders, the crack of my skull against marble, the threat whispered in my ear. I was paying for my sins, yes, but not in confession or apology or changed behavior. I was paying for them in bruises. I turned off the bathroom light and walked to my bedroom, my phone still clutched in my hand. Tomorrow, I would put on my best dress. I would walk into that party with my head high and my bruise visible. And I would discover once and for all whether anyone in that room, my son, my friends, my family, would stand up for me. Or if I was truly as alone as Chloe wanted me to believe. The woman in the mirror had been broken tonight. But she wasn't beaten. Not yet. I chose a navy dress, elegant, simple, the kind that commanded attention without screaming for it. I left my face bare of makeup, except for a touch of lipstick that felt like armor. When I looked in the mirror one last time before leaving, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than 60. She looked like someone who'd survived something. I suppose that was accurate. I drove to the venue, a beautiful restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water, the kind of place I'd chosen months ago when I still thought this birthday would be a celebration. I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, reminding myself to breathe. Then I got out of the car and walked toward my own execution. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt it, the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations stuttered and died mid-sentence. The room was perfect. 50-some guests in cocktail attire, champagne flutes catching the late afternoon light, elegant floral arrangements on every table. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a stage set for a tragedy. I walked further into the room, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and the whispers started. Low at first, then growing louder as more people noticed. "Oh my God! Is that? What happened to her face?" I kept my chin up, my eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares. But I felt them like physical touches, dozens of eyes scanning the bruise that spread across my cheek like a stain. Chloe appeared out of nowhere, rushing toward me with her hands outstretched, her face arranged in an expression of exaggerated concern. She looked stunning, a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, her hair styled in perfect waves, diamond earrings catching the light. "Alara!" she exclaimed, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Oh my God, I told you to rest! You should have stayed home!" She reached for my arm and I stepped back instinctively, putting space between us. Her eyes flickered. Annoyance? Satisfaction? Before the concerned mask slid back into place. "I'm fine," I said quietly, but my voice carried in the sudden silence. "I wanted to be here." Liam appeared behind her, and my heart clenched. He was my son, my beautiful boy, now 35 and looking at me with a stranger's eyes. He didn't rush forward, didn't ask if I was okay. He just stood there beside his wife, arms crossed over his chest, his expression utterly blank, no shock, no concern, no horror at seeing his mother's battered face, just nothing. Cold, empty indifference that hurt worse than any physical blow. I searched his face for some sign of the child I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when his goldfish died, who'd hugged me so tightly at his father's funeral I thought he'd never let go. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who looked at my bruised face and felt nothing. "Alara, what happened to your face?" The question came from Margaret, an old friend from the university where I used to work. Her voice was gentle, worried, and it cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife. The room went completely silent. I could feel everyone waiting, watching. This was the moment. I could lie, say I'd tripped, fallen, had an accident. I could protect Liam and Chloe, protect myself from the humiliation of admitting what had really happened. My mouth opened, the lie ready on my tongue. I had an accident. In the kitchen, the words came out broken, uncertain. I looked at Liam as I said them, waiting for what? Relief? Gratitude? Some small acknowledgement that I was protecting him? But Liam's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost disappointed, like my lie was an insult to his intelligence. And in that moment, I understood. He was waiting for me to cover for them. He expected it. He knew Chloe had hurt me, and he thought I'd do what I'd always done, smooth things over, make excuses, take the blame. He thought I was still that woman, the woman who apologized for her own bruises. Before I could say anything else, before I could walk back the lie or tell the truth, Liam stepped forward. His voice was clear, strong, carrying across the silent room with chilling certainty. "It wasn't an accident, Mom," he said. "It was my wife. She taught you some respect." Time stopped. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense, not in the order he'd spoken them, not in the tone he'd used. Proud. He sounded proud. There was no apology, no shame, no attempt to soften the blow, just a straightforward admission, delivered like he was announcing a business achievement. "My daughter-in-law assaulted me, and my son was bragging about it." The room erupted in shocked gasps and whispered exclamations. I saw jaws literally drop, saw people's faces cycle through disbelief, horror, outrage. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. David, my late husband's best friend, took a step toward Liam before stopping himself. But I couldn't process any of it. I was trapped in that moment, in those words, in the casual cruelty of my son's confession. I looked at Chloe. She was trying to maintain her concerned expression, but I saw it. The smirk she couldn't quite suppress, the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. She was pleased. This had been her plan all along, not just to hurt me, but to humiliate me publicly, to demonstrate her power over me in front of everyone who mattered. And Liam had just handed her that victory. He'd confessed to the crime and framed it as justice. My knees felt weak, the room tilted. I put a hand on the nearest table to steady myself, and someone, I didn't see who, asked if I needed to sit down. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there, drowning in the realization that my son didn't just condone what his wife had done, he celebrated it. Then I saw him. Mark. My brother, standing at the back of the room near the entrance, still in his travel clothes, jeans and a button-down, a carry-on bag slung over his shoulder. He must have come straight from the airport. Our eyes met across the crowd, and I saw his face transform from confusion to understanding to something cold and deadly. He'd heard. He'd heard everything. Liam's confession, the pride in his voice, the smirk on Chloe's face. Mark set down his bag with deliberate care and began walking forward, cutting through the crowd of frozen guests like a shark through water. People stepped aside instinctively, sensing the danger radiating from him. His face was stone, utterly expressionless, but I knew that look. I'd seen it once before, years ago, when someone had threatened our mother. It was the look of a man who'd made a decision, and nothing would stop him from following through. He walked straight up to Liam, who finally seemed to register that something was wrong. Liam's proud expression faltered. He took a half step back, but Mark was already there, stopping directly in front of him. Mark was taller than Liam by 3 inches, broader by 30 pounds, and in that moment he seemed even larger, a wall of controlled fury that Liam couldn't escape. Mark didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't raise a hand. He simply stood there, looking down at my son with an expression of such absolute contempt that several people actually gasped. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I was waiting too, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was quiet. So quiet that people in the back had to lean forward to hear. But every word landed like a hammer blow. "Liam," he said, each syllable precisely measured, "you just publicly confessed to enabling assault, and you did it on the day your mother turned 60. He paused, letting that sink in, letting everyone in the room absorb the full weight of what Liam had done. Then he continued, his voice dropping even lower. More dangerous. "It seems you violated the terms of the trust your father set up for you. Your wife didn't teach her respect." He glanced at Chloe, who'd gone pale. "She just cost you everything. He looked back at Liam, and I saw something in my brother's eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger, certainty, and I can prove it. The room erupted. People started talking at once. Questions, exclamations, shocked whispers. But I couldn't hear any of it. I was watching Liam's face as he processed what Mark had said. The pride drained away, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror. "What trust?" he said, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" But Mark didn't answer. He turned away from Liam, dismissing him like he was nothing, and walked toward me. His hand found my elbow, gentle but firm. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "Just to me. You don't need to stay here." I looked around the room, at the shocked faces, at Chloe's calculating expression, at Liam standing there looking lost and afraid, and I realized everything had just changed. Everything. If you've made it this far, I hope this story resonated with you. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between love and self-preservation? I read every comment, and your stories matter. Thank you for being here. My brother didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Sometimes the quietest words carry the sharpest blades. Mark stood there in front of Liam, perfectly still, his face carved from granite. He looked at my son, then at Chloe, then back at Liam with an expression of such profound disappointment that I felt it in my own chest. "You just confessed," Mark said simply, as if he were commenting on the weather. The room was so silent I could hear someone's champagne glass trembling in their hand, the delicate clink of ice against crystal. Liam's proud expression was crumbling, replaced by something between confusion and defiance, like a child caught doing something wrong but not yet willing to admit it. "Confessed to what?" Liam shot back, his voice harder now, defensive. He straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim the authority he'd felt moments ago when he'd thought humiliating me was a victory. Teaching my mother a lesson she should have learned years ago? There it was, the resentment, raw and ugly, finally visible to everyone in the room. I'd known it was there, simmering beneath the surface for years, but hearing him say it so openly, so viciously, felt like being struck all over again. Several people gasped. I saw David shaking his head slowly, his face twisted in disgust. Margaret had tears in her eyes, but Mark's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost satisfied, as if Liam had just confirmed exactly what he'd suspected. "You just publicly admitted," Mark said, each word deliberate and precise, "that your wife physically assaulted your mother. In front of 50 witnesses. He gestured to the room, to all the people standing frozen in various states of shock and horror. "Do you understand what that means?" Liam's face flushed red, and I could see him trying to calculate, trying to figure out if he'd made a mistake. But before he could respond, Chloe stepped between them, her hand on Liam's chest in a gesture that might have looked protective if I didn't know better. She was inserting herself into the narrative, trying to take control before it spiraled completely out of her grasp. "She provoked me," Chloe said, her voice rising with indignation, playing to the crowd. She turned slightly, making sure everyone could see her face, could see the righteous anger she was performing. "She's been undermining me for months, criticizing everything I do, every choice I make. She came into my home and insulted me, insulted the party I'd planned for her. Ask anyone, she's been impossible." She was good, I had to admit. The way she said it made it sound almost reasonable, like I'd been some kind of monster who'd finally gotten what I deserved. I saw a few heads nodding uncertainly, people who didn't know the full story, who were willing to believe that maybe this was somehow mutual, somehow justified. But Mark didn't even look at her. "I'm not asking anyone," he said, his voice cutting through her performance like a scalpel through tissue. "I'm telling you both, you just violated the terms of your father's trust." The words landed like bombs in the silent room. Liam's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. "What trust?" he said, and his voice cracked on the second word, all the bravado draining away. "The money's in Mom's control, it always has been." I could hear the confusion, the fear creeping into his voice. He'd spent years resenting me for holding his inheritance over his head, and now Mark was telling him something different, something he didn't understand. "No, Liam," Mark said, and for the first time I heard something like pity in his voice. "Your mother was the trustee. I'm the executor. And your father included a very specific clause about what happens if you, or anyone acting with your consent, harms her." The room erupted in whispers. I felt dizzy, my hand gripping the table edge so hard my knuckles went white. What was Mark talking about? What clause? My husband had died 15 years ago, and yes, there had been a trust for Liam, but I'd always thought it was simple. Money held, until he was mature enough to handle it responsibly. I'd never heard anything about a moral clause. Had my husband known? Had he predicted this? Chloe's composure finally cracked. Her perfectly made-up face twisted into something ugly, panicked. "You're lying," she said, but her voice wavered. "There's no clause like that. We would have known. Our lawyer would have—" She stopped, realizing she was admitting they'd been looking into the trust, probably trying to find ways to access the money faster. Mark smiled, but it was a terrible smile, cold and sharp. "Read the will, Chloe," he said. "Section 7, paragraph 4, it's all there. Your father-in-law was a very thorough man." He looked at Liam, and I saw my son flinch. "You didn't just cost yourself a mother-in-law," Mark continued, his voice soft and deadly. "You cost your husband everything." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see people's brains working, trying to process what they'd just heard. Liam stood there looking utterly lost, like the ground had opened up beneath his feet. Chloe was calculating, her eyes darting between Mark and Liam and me, trying to find an angle, a way to salvage this. But there wasn't one. Mark had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my birthday party, and the fallout was only beginning. I felt vindication rushing through me, hot and fierce. They tried to humiliate me, to break me, and instead they destroyed themselves. But beneath that vindication was terror. What would this do to Liam? What would this do to what was left of our relationship? Mark turned away from them, dismissing them as if they were no longer worth his attention, and walked toward me. His hand found my elbow, and the gentle touch nearly broke me. I'd been holding myself together through sheer force of will, but Mark's kindness threatened to crack the facade. "We're leaving," he said quietly, just to me. His eyes searched my face, checking for signs that I might collapse. "You don't need to stay here." I looked around the room one more time, at the shocked faces of my friends, at Margaret crying openly now, at David looking like he wanted to punch someone, at Chloe, whose mask had slipped to reveal the calculating predator beneath, and at Liam, my son, standing in the wreckage of his own making, finally understanding that actions have consequences. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Let's go." Mark guided me toward the door, his hand steady on my back. As we walked through the crowd, people parted like water, and I heard fragments of whispered conversations. "Did you hear what he said? I can't believe Liam. That poor woman." Margaret caught my hand as I passed, squeezing it tight, tears streaming down her face. I squeezed back but didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I'd fall apart, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. Not in front of them. Not in front of Liam and Chloe, who were still standing in the center of the room, frozen in their own personal nightmare. As we stepped out into the evening air, the door closing behind us on the chaos inside, I heard Liam call out, "Mom, wait!" But I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. The rental car smelled like coffee and airport air freshener. I sat in the passenger seat, numb, watching the city lights blur past the window as Mark drove toward his hotel. My hands were shaking in my lap, and I couldn't seem to make them stop. The adrenaline that had kept me upright at the party was draining away, leaving behind exhaustion so profound I felt like I might dissolve into the leather seat. "You knew about this clause?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Mark kept his eyes on the road, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Yes," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Your husband told me about it 2 weeks before he died. He made me swear not to tell you unless it was necessary." He glanced at me. "It's necessary." My husband. Robert. 15 years dead, and he was still protecting me. The thought made my throat tight with unshed tears. "Why didn't he tell me himself?" I asked. Mark pulled into the hotel parking lot, found a spot, and turned off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. "Because he knew you'd argue," Mark said gently. "He knew you'd say Liam would never hurt you, that you didn't need protection from your own son. And back then, maybe you didn't. But Robert was a smart man. He knew that resentment could turn toxic over time. He wanted to make sure you'd be safe if that ever happened." He finally turned to look at me. "And it did happen, Alara. It did." We went up to his room, a bland corporate hotel suite with a desk and a mini fridge and curtains that blocked out the night. Mark pulled a leather folder from his carry-on bag, the kind lawyers use, and spread papers across the desk. "Here," he said, pointing to a specific paragraph in the middle of a dense legal document. "Read it." I leaned forward, squinting at the small print, and began to read aloud. "Should Liam Ashford knowingly enable, permit, or celebrate physical or financial abuse of his mother, Alara Ashford, all trust assets shall immediately revert to said Alara Ashford or, at the executor's discretion, to a designated charitable organization focused on family welfare." I read it 3 times, trying to absorb the implications. Knowingly enable, celebrate, Liam's words at the party, "She taught her some respect," echoed in my head. "How much?" I asked quietly. "How much money are we talking about?" Mark flipped to another page. $4.7 million, he said. I actually gasped. "What? No, that can't be right. I thought it was around $1 million, maybe a bit more." Mark shook his head. "Robert invested well, very well. He also didn't want Liam to know the full amount. He was afraid it would make him lazy, entitled. So he kept the details vague. Told Liam it was substantial but never specified." He pointed to another section. "The trust was set to release to Liam at age 40. He's 35 now, so 5 more years. But only if he maintained what the document calls a good faith relationship with you. No abuse, no exploitation, no enabling violence against you." I sank into the desk chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. Nearly $5 million. Liam had been waiting for $5 million, and in one moment of pride and cruelty, he'd confessed to losing all of it. The guilt hit me like a wave. "He wrote this because he knew I'd be controlling," I said, my voice breaking. "He was protecting Liam from me, from my need to control him. This is my fault, all of this." Mark pulled the other chair over and sat down facing me, his knees nearly touching mine. "No, Alara," he said firmly. "Robert wrote this because he knew Liam might resent you for the control, for the money, for all of it. He wanted to make sure you'd be safe if that resentment turned dangerous, and it did. This isn't about protecting Liam from you, it's about protecting you from what Liam might become." "If we do this," I said, looking up at Mark with tears finally spilling down my cheeks, "if we actually enforce this clause, I lose my son forever. Whatever's left of our relationship, it's gone." Mark's face softened, and he reached out to take my hand. "Alara," he said quietly, "you already lost him. He stood in a room full of people and bragged about his wife assaulting you. He was proud of it. That's not your son anymore. That's a stranger wearing his face." The words hurt because they were true. I'd been holding on to the ghost of the boy Liam used to be, refusing to see the man he'd become. A man who resented me so much that my pain brought him satisfaction. Mark pulled out another folder, this one thicker. "I've already started compiling evidence," he said, flipping it open. "Witness testimony from the party, David, Margaret, at least a dozen others who heard Liam's confession. Photos of your bruise that Margaret took on her phone before you left, she sent them to me already. He showed me the photos and I flinched. Seeing the bruise from an outside perspective made it look even worse. The swelling, the discoloration, the visible proof of violence. And we have Liam's recorded confession," Mark continued. "At least 3 people were recording the party on their phones. The whole thing is documented." He looked at me seriously. "This isn't just about money anymore. This is about sending a message that what they did wasn't okay." "What happens next?" I asked, my voice small. Mark leaned back, considering. "We file a motion with the probate court to enforce the trust's moral clause. Given Liam's public confession, it should be straightforward. The money reverts to you. Or we can designate a charity if you prefer. We also have the option of filing assault charges against Chloe, though that's up to you." I thought about Chloe, her cold eyes as she stood over me in her kitchen, her smirk at the party. "I want her to face consequences," I said slowly. "But I don't want to be cruel. I just want—" I stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. "You want justice," Mark supplied. "You want them to understand that what they did was wrong, and you want to be safe." My husband knew. Even in death, he was trying to save me from the monster I helped create. I thought about Robert, about the nights after Liam was born when we had stayed up worrying about what kind of man our son would become, about the conversations we'd had after Robert's diagnosis, when he'd tried to prepare me for raising a teenager alone. He must have seen something then, some seed of resentment, some warning sign that made him add that clause. He'd given me a choice: forgive or survive. And now I had to make it. "The trust isn't just about money, is it?" I asked, looking at the document again. "It's about character, about who Liam chooses to be." Mark nodded. "Your husband was testing him in a way, not consciously. Robert would never have wanted it to come to this. But yes, the clause is essentially a character test. And Liam failed." "Alara," Mark said, his voice gentle but firm, "the question isn't whether you'll lose Liam. You already lost him. The question is, will you let him get away with it? Will you let Chloe get away with assaulting you? Will you teach them that your love means you'll tolerate anything, even violence?" I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. I thought about the woman I'd been, controlling, critical, holding too tight. I thought about the woman I'd become, bruised, humiliated, standing at her own birthday party like a specimen on display. And I thought about the woman I wanted to be. Someone who loved deeply but refused to be destroyed by that love. Someone who knew the difference between forgiveness and surrender. I opened my eyes and looked at my brother. "Do it," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "Enforce the clause. I won't press criminal charges against Chloe, not yet. But I want the trust revoked. I want them to understand that actions have consequences." Mark nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. "You're doing the right thing," he said. I wasn't sure about that. All I knew was that I was doing the only thing I could do and still live with myself. My husband had given me a way out, a way to survive, and I was going to take it. Even if it meant losing the son I'd spent 35 years loving. Even if it meant admitting that sometimes love isn't enough. There's a moment when grief turns to steel. When you realize that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I reached that moment in a lawyer's office 3 days after my birthday party, reading texts that proved my son wanted me silenced. Mark had arranged the meeting with Robert's estate attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who'd handled my husband's affairs for decades. She sat across from us in her corner office, reading through the trust documents with the kind of focused intensity that made me understand why Robert had trusted her. When she finally looked up, she removed her reading glasses and delivered her verdict with clinical precision. The clause is ironclad. Given the public confession and witness testimony, enforcement should be straightforward. She paused, studying my bruised face with something like sympathy. "I'm sorry it came to this, Mrs. Ashford." The documentation began immediately. Mark drove me to the police station, where I filed a report with a young officer who looked uncomfortable taking notes about a mother being assaulted by her daughter-in-law. I wasn't pressing charges. Not yet. But Patricia had insisted we create an official record. Paper trail, she'd said. Everything documented, everything time-stamped. No room for alternative narratives. So I sat in that sterile interview room and recited the facts, the shove, the fall, the crack of my head against marble, the threat whispered in my ear. The officer photographed my bruise from multiple angles, and I signed statement after statement, my hand cramping around the pen. When it was done, I felt hollowed out, like I'd given testimony at my own funeral. My doctor's appointment was worse. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been my physician for 20 years, had seen me through Robert's death and countless minor ailments, and the look on her face when she saw the bruise made me want to cry. She didn't ask if I'd fallen or bumped into something. She simply said, "Who did this to you?" and listened without judgment as I explained. She took more photographs, measured the contusion, checked for signs of concussion I'd been ignoring. In her notes, she wrote, "Blunt force trauma consistent with assault, significant bruising and swelling, patient reports being pushed into kitchen counter by family member. The clinical language made it real in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't family drama, this was documented violence." But it was the text messages that broke something fundamental inside me. Mark had legal standing as executor to subpoena phone records, and Patricia had moved quickly. When the messages came through, Mark called me to his hotel room to review them together. He spread printouts across the desk, his face grim. "You need to see these," he said quietly. I picked up the first page, and my hands started shaking. The exchange was from 2 hours after Chloe assaulted me. The afternoon I'd driven home and sat in my car touching my swelling eye, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. "Chloe to Liam, she'll fall in line now, trust me." Liam's response, sent 3 minutes later, "About time someone shut her up." I read those words over and over, trying to make them mean something different, trying to find some interpretation where my son wasn't gleeful about my pain. But there was no other way to read it. Liam wasn't horrified by what his wife had done. He wasn't worried about me or angry at Chloe for crossing a line. He was satisfied. He'd wanted me silenced, controlled, put in my place, and Chloe had done it for him. The text continued, dozens of them, going back weeks. Messages where Chloe complained about my interference and Liam encouraged her to set boundaries. A particularly damning thread from a month ago where Chloe wrote, "Your mother needs to learn she's not in charge anymore." Liam's response, "She will, one way or another." The smoking gun came near the end of the file. A text from Chloe to Liam sent 3 months before the assault. "I've been researching the trust. There has to be a way to access it earlier. Your mother can't hold it over you forever." Liam had responded with a shrugging emoji and, "She controls everything until I'm 40. That's 5 more years of her judgment." Chloe's reply chilled me, "Not if she's not around to control it. Or not in a position to." I stared at those words until they blurred. This wasn't about a spontaneous argument that got out of hand. This was premeditated. Chloe had been researching ways around the trust, ways to remove me from the equation, and the assault was part of that strategy. She'd wanted to break me, to make me too afraid to interfere, to establish dominance in the family hierarchy. Mark watched me process it all, his face carefully neutral. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know this isn't what you wanted to find, but in a strange way, it was. Because it removed all ambiguity, all the doubt I'd been carrying about whether I deserved what happened. I'd been a difficult mother, yes, controlling, critical, too involved in Liam's life. But reading those texts made it clear, Liam wasn't just complicit in the violence. He was glad it happened. He'd wanted me silenced. And Chloe had obliged. Whatever mistakes I'd made as a mother, they didn't justify this calculated cruelty. They didn't justify my son celebrating my pain." Patricia joined us that evening for what she called a strategy session. She laid out the plan with military precision. First, we'd file a motion with the probate court to enforce the trust's moral clause, using Liam's public confession as primary evidence. Second, we'd make all documentation public through legal filings, the police report, medical records, witness statements, text messages. "The moment we file, this becomes public record," Patricia warned. "Reporters may pick it up. Your family's private business will be exposed." I nodded. "Good. Let everyone see what happened. Let there be no more secrets, no more quiet tolerance of abuse." Third, we'd wait for Liam and Chloe's response. "They'll fight it," Patricia said. "They'll hire lawyers, claim the clause is invalid, argue that you provoked the assault. They'll drag your past into court, your controlling behavior, the financial leverage you held over Liam. Are you ready for that?" "I was a difficult mother," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I admit that freely. I was controlling. I held money over his head. I made him feel small and incapable. I own all of that." I looked at Mark, then at Patricia. "But I never laid a hand on my son. I never threatened him, I never made him fear for his safety in his own home, and he just let his wife do what he always wished he could. The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they were true. Liam had wanted to hurt me for years, and Chloe had given him permission, had done it for him, and he'd been grateful. That night, alone in my house, I did something I'd been avoiding. I wrote a letter to Liam, not to send, not yet, maybe not ever, but because I needed to say things I might never get to say to his face. I wrote about his childhood, about the happy memories before Robert died. I wrote about my mistakes, naming each one specifically, taking responsibility for the pain I'd caused. But I also wrote about what he'd done, about the texts, about his confession at the party. I wrote about how love shouldn't require me to accept violence, how being his mother didn't mean I had to let him destroy me. When I finished, it was 4 pages long, and my tears had smudged some of the ink. I folded it carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote his name on the front. Then I put it in my desk drawer. Someday, I'd decide whether he deserved to read it, but not today. Photos, texts, medical records, police reports, these became mirrors that captured truth permanently. No more denial, no more alternative narratives, no more gaslighting about what had really happened. The documentation was irrefutable, a paper trail of sins that would follow Liam and Chloe into court and beyond. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there. I mourned the son I'd lost, the relationship that could never be repaired. But beneath the grief was something harder, colder, determination. I'd spent my whole life trying to control outcomes, trying to shape Liam into someone who could survive without me. And in doing so, I'd created someone who resented me so deeply that my pain brought him joy. I couldn't undo that. But I could refuse to be his victim any longer. Tomorrow, the legal battle would begin, and this time, I wouldn't be fighting alone. I gave him one chance. Not because I believed he'd take it, but because I needed to know, for certain, that the boy I raised was truly gone. The invitation Mark sent was formal, almost ceremonial. Dinner to discuss trust matters. Your presence is mandatory per estate law. Friday, 7 p.m., the Sterling Room. He'd chosen the location carefully, an upscale restaurant with private dining rooms, neutral ground where witnesses would be nearby but conversations could remain confidential. When I asked Mark if I should attend, he'd hesitated. It might be easier if you weren't there, he'd said, but I insisted. I needed to see Liam's face when confronted with the evidence. I needed to look him in the eye one more time. Chloe arrived, dressed for battle. I watched from the restaurant's bar as she swept through the entrance in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless. She walked like someone who'd already won, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. But when I looked closer, I saw tension in her shoulders, saw the way her jaw was clenched too tight. She thought this was a negotiation she could win, a conversation where her charm and manipulation would carry the day. She had no idea what was waiting for her in that private room. Liam followed behind her, and the difference was striking. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes, his suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it, his movements jerky with barely controlled anxiety. He'd been researching, Mark had told me, spending hours online, digging through estate law websites, finding vague references to character clauses and moral conditions in trusts. He knew something bad was coming, he just didn't know how bad. I waited 5 minutes after they went in before following. When I entered the private dining room, Mark was already seated at the head of the table, Patricia beside him with her briefcase open and documents arranged in neat stacks. Liam and Chloe sat across from them, and the shock on their faces when they saw me was almost comical. "What is she doing here?" Chloe demanded, half rising from her chair. Mark's voice was ice. "Sit down, Mrs. Ashford. Your mother-in-law has every right to attend a meeting about her late husband's trust." Chloe sat, but her eyes never left me, calculating and cold. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table from Mark, directly across from Liam. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. Mark slid a folder across the table toward Liam. "The trust, in full," he said simply. Read section 7. Liam's hands trembled as he opened it, scanning the pages until he found the relevant clause. I watched his face change as he read, confusion giving way to comprehension, then to something like horror. Chloe leaned over to read it too, and I saw the exact moment she understood. Her face went pale beneath her makeup. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp but wavering. "She provoked me. She came into my home and insulted everything about me, about the party I'd planned for her. She's been sabotaging our marriage since day one, turning Liam against me with her constant criticism. Ask him. Tell them, Liam." Liam opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at Chloe, then at the document, then at Mark. "There has to be some mistake," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "This can't be. There has to be a way to—" Mark didn't let him finish. He placed a second folder on the table, this one thicker, and opened it to reveal neatly organized sections with labeled tabs. "Police report," he said, tapping the first tab. "Medical records documenting blunt force trauma." Tap. "Witness statements from your mother's birthday party, where you publicly confess to enabling your wife's assault." Tap. "And text messages between you and Chloe, subpoenaed legally in my capacity as executor." He pushed the folder toward them. "Read them." Liam pulled the folder closer with shaking hands and began reading. I watched his face drain of color, watched his lips move silently as he absorbed his own words about times someone shut her up. He flipped to the next page, then the next, reading message after message that Patricia had highlighted in yellow. The research about the trust, the discussions about how to handle me, Chloe's planning, his encouragement. When he finally looked up, he didn't look at Chloe or Mark or Patricia. He looked at me, and for the first time since the assault, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Fear, shame, the dawning realization of what he'd done and what it had cost him. He tried to speak, his mouth working soundlessly, but no words came. He just sat there, staring at me like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. Chloe, sensing the shift in power, tried to regain control. "These are private conversations taken out of context," she said, her voice rising. "You can't use these against us. We have rights." Patricia cut her off with the kind of cold precision only a seasoned attorney could muster. "You have the right to remain silent, which I suggest you exercise. Every word you say here is being recorded for potential use in court." She gestured to a small device on the table that I hadn't noticed before. Chloe's mouth snapped shut, and I saw real panic flash across her face. She'd walked into this dinner thinking she could charm or manipulate her way out. She was only now realizing this wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. Mark looked at me, giving me a small nod, my cue. I'd asked for this moment, insisted on it despite his reservations. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table, and looked directly at my son. "Liam," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "if you apologize, truly apologize, not just because you're caught, but because you understand what you've done, I'll ask Mark to reconsider." I paused, letting that sink in. "But you have to mean it. You have to look me in the eye and tell me you're sorry for letting your wife assault me, for celebrating my pain, for wanting me silenced." The room was utterly silent. Chloe was frozen, her eyes darting between Liam and me. Patricia sat perfectly still, watching. Mark's expression was carefully neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the skepticism in his eyes. He didn't think Liam would do it. Neither did I, really. But I had to offer the chance. I had to know. Liam's mouth opened. His eyes were shining with unshed tears, his face twisted with emotion. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might actually do it. Might actually find the courage to own what he'd done and ask for forgiveness. His lips formed the beginning of a word, "Mom, But Chloe's hand shot out, gripping his arm with visible force. "Don't you dare," she hissed, loud enough for all of us to hear. "She doesn't deserve it. After everything she put you through, after years of controlling you and making you feel worthless, don't you dare apologize to her." Her fingernails were digging into his sleeve, and I could see the possessiveness in her gesture, the desperation. She was losing him, losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. Liam looked at his wife. Then he looked at me. And then, God help me, he stayed silent, his mouth closed. The tears didn't fall. He turned his face away, and the moment shattered like glass. That silence said everything. He'd chosen. Not consciously, maybe not even deliberately, but he'd chosen. Chosen Chloe's version of reality over mine. Chosen resentment over reconciliation. Chosen to believe I deserved what happened because it was easier than admitting he'd enabled abuse. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been cracking for months but had somehow held together until this moment. This dinner had been a mirror held up to Liam's character, giving him one last chance to see himself clearly. And he'd looked away. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound too loud in the suffocating silence. "Then we're done here," I said quietly. I looked at Patricia. "Proceed with the filing." She nodded once, brisk and professional. I looked at Mark. "Thank you for trying." He stood too, moving to my side in silent support. And finally, I looked at Liam one last time. "I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you needed," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed. "But I'm not sorry for protecting myself. Not anymore." I walked toward the door, Mark's hand gentle on my back, leaving behind my son and his wife in their private nightmare of consequences. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Chloe's voice rising in anger, heard Liam's broken response, heard the sound of papers rustling as Patricia gathered her evidence. But I didn't look back. The boy I'd raised was gone, and the man who'd taken his place had just proven he wasn't worth mourning. There's a special kind of grief that comes with losing someone who's still alive, who's sitting right in front of you, but might as well be a stranger. I carried that grief out of the restaurant and into the night, knowing that whatever came next, the legal battles, the public exposure, the financial ruin, Liam had chosen it all himself. I'd given him one chance, and he'd thrown it away. If you are still watching, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts. I read and reply every comment, and your stories matter. Thank you for being here. They say justice is blind, but I saw everything. I saw my son lie under oath. I saw my daughter-in-law's mask slip, and I saw the man my husband was, protecting me even in death. The lawsuit came 2 weeks after the dinner, delivered to Mark's hotel by a process server who looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. Liam and Chloe were challenging the trust's moral clause, claiming it was unconstitutionally vague and punitive. Their lawyer, some expensive shark from downtown, argued that the clause was an improper restriction on inheritance, that my late husband couldn't have intended for such a severe penalty, that the whole thing was my vindictive manipulation of estate law. Reading their complaint made me feel sick. They were painting themselves as victims of my decades-long control, claiming the trust clause was just another example of my tyranny extending beyond the grave. The moment the lawsuit was filed, it became public record. Patricia had warned me this would happen, but I wasn't prepared for how quickly the media would pick it up. The headline appeared in the local paper the next morning. Heir sues mother after wife's assault. Trust battle erupts over domestic violence claim. By afternoon, it had spread online, shared across social media with increasingly sensational commentary. I became a minor celebrity overnight. The mother who fought back, they called me, though some comments were far less kind. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests from local news stations, morning shows, podcasts dedicated to family drama. I declined every single one. This wasn't about publicity or revenge fantasies. This was about survival, about drawing a line that said violence against me would have consequences. Chloe, however, had no such restraint. 3 days after the story broke, she posted a lengthy Instagram rant that her lawyer must have begged her not to write. I didn't see it myself. I deleted social media months ago, but Mark showed me screenshots, his face grim. She'd written thousands of words about toxic mother-in-laws who can't let go, about false accusations used as weapons, about how she'd been defending herself against years of psychological abuse. She posted old photos of family dinners where I'd apparently looked controlling, shared text messages where I'd offered unsolicited advice, painted herself as a victimized daughter-in-law finally standing up to a tyrant. The post went viral, but not in the way she'd intended. The comments were brutal. "You hit a 60-year-old woman." There are literally witness statements. This is what abusers do: play victim while caught red-handed. By the next morning, she'd deleted it, but the screenshots lived forever. My deposition came in late September, in a sterile conference room that smelled like old coffee and anxiety. Liam and Chloe's lawyer was a man named Philip Grayson. Silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of attorney who made you feel guilty just by looking at you. He spent 4 hours asking me about every mistake I'd ever made as a mother. Was I controlling? Yes. Did I monitor Liam's finances even as an adult? Yes. Did I criticize his life choices? Often. Did I use money as leverage to influence his decisions? Absolutely. I admitted it all calmly, my voice steady, Patricia sitting beside me and occasionally objecting, but mostly letting me speak. I was a difficult mother, I said directly into the camera, recording my testimony. I was overbearing. I didn't trust my son to make good decisions. I was wrong about many things. I paused, looking directly at Grayson. But I never hit my son. I never threatened him with violence. I never made him fear for his physical safety. Liam's deposition was harder to watch. Patricia showed me the video afterward, and I almost asked her to turn it off. My son sat in that same conference room looking diminished, his voice uncertain as Patricia questioned him. "Did you know your wife assaulted your mother?" she asked. Liam shifted uncomfortably. "She defended herself," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "From what?" Patricia pressed. "What physical threat was your wife defending herself against?" Silence. Liam's mouth opened and closed. "My mother said something hurtful," he finally managed. "About Chloe's character." Patricia leaned forward. "And that justified physical violence? Shoving a 60-year-old woman into a marble counter?" More silence. Liam looked at his lawyer, at the camera, anywhere but at Patricia's face. "I don't know," he whispered. And that moment, that broken admission, hurt worse than any of his proud declarations at my birthday party. The text messages became the centerpiece of the trial. Grayson tried desperately to suppress them, arguing they were private communications obtained through questionable means. But the judge, a woman in her 50s named Judge Maria Santos, shut him down immediately. "The executor has legal standing to subpoena communications relevant to trust enforcement," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "The texts are admissible." So they were read aloud in open court, projected on a screen for everyone to see. Chloe's words, "She'll fall in line now, trust me." Liam's response, "About time someone shut her up." The courtroom was silent except for Patricia's voice reading each message with clinical precision. I watched the judge's face tighten with each new text, watched the court reporter's fingers fly across her machine, watched Liam slump lower in his chair. When Patricia read the messages about researching the trust, about finding ways to handle me, I saw Judge Santos make a note with such force her pen nearly tore through the paper. The ruling came on a gray October morning. Judge Santos didn't waste time with lengthy preamble. "The clause in question is neither unconstitutionally vague nor improperly punitive," she said, reading from her written decision. "It clearly states that knowing enablement or celebration of abuse against the beneficiary's mother will result in trust revocation." Mr. Ashford's own words at the birthday party constitute a public confession to such enablement. The text messages demonstrate premeditation and malicious intent on the part of both Mr. Ashford and Mrs. Chloe Ashford. She looked up from her notes directly at Liam. "Mr. Ashford publicly endorsed spousal violence against his mother. The trust is hereby revoked per the terms established by the late Robert Ashford." The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. Chloe screamed. Not a gasp or a sob, but an actual scream of rage and disbelief. "This is insane!" she shrieked, standing up so fast her chair fell backward. "She's lying! She manipulated all of you!" Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down, but she yanked away from him. "We'll appeal! We'll take this to the Supreme Court if we have to!" Judge Santos's face turned to stone. "Mrs. Ashford, one more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Sit down and be silent." Chloe sat, but the venom in her eyes as she stared at me was palpable. Liam, by contrast, didn't move. He just sat there, motionless as a statue, staring at nothing. I watched him and felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a bone-deep exhaustion that made me want to sleep for 1,000 years. The final provision was read by the judge. The $4.7 million would be split, according to Robert's secondary instructions, which I hadn't even known existed. $2 million to me, to ensure my financial security for the rest of my life, and $2.7 million to a domestic violence charity, specifically one that helped victims of family abuse, including elder abuse. "Mr. Ashford receives nothing," Judge Santos said, her voice flat. "This court finds that he violated the clear terms of his father's trust and must accept the consequences of his actions." She added one more thing. Unprompted, looking at Grayson with something like disgust, counsel attempted to argue that Mrs. Alara Ashford's past controlling behavior justified or mitigated the assault. This court finds that argument not only legally without merit, but morally reprehensible. A mother's difficult personality does not justify violence against her. Full stop. I closed my eyes as the gavel fell one final time. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and movement, but I stayed perfectly still. I'd won. The trust was revoked, the money was secured, Liam and Chloe had been exposed and humiliated in open court. But it felt nothing like victory. It felt like standing in the ruins of a demolished building, trying to remember what had once stood there. The courtroom was the ultimate mirror. Truth exposed under oath, lies dissected and displayed, consequences delivered without mercy. Every word spoken here would be part of the public record forever, accessible to anyone who wanted to see exactly how my family had destroyed itself. As I stood to leave, I caught one last glimpse of Liam. He was staring at his hands, and his face was the face of a man who'd finally understood what he'd lost. But understanding came too late. It always does. Forgiveness isn't a magic eraser. It doesn't undo the bruise, the humiliation, the betrayal. It just means I'm choosing not to let him destroy the rest of my life. But he has to live with what he did, and so do I. 3 months after the verdict, I'd built a quiet routine in my life. Morning walks, volunteer work at a women's shelter, dinners with Mark, who'd extended his stay indefinitely. I was learning to exist in the space where my son used to be, learning to carry the grief without letting it consume me. Then my phone rang one Tuesday afternoon, and Liam's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the decline button for a long moment, but curiosity, or maybe some residual maternal instinct, made me pick up. "Mom." His voice cracked on the word. "I need to talk to you. Please." The reports had reached me through Mark. Liam and Chloe's marriage was imploding spectacularly. She blamed him for not fighting harder, for his pathetic performance in court, for losing millions of dollars through his weakness. He blamed her for ruining everything, for the assault that triggered it all, for pushing him to betray his own mother. They'd fought loudly and publicly, their arguments so vicious that neighbors had called the police twice for domestic disturbances. Now she'd filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences and attempting to claim half of Liam's business assets. But there was almost nothing left to claim. Legal fees had drained his savings, his reputation in their social circle was destroyed, and several clients had quietly dropped him after the news coverage. Liam had lost everything: his inheritance, his marriage, his dignity, and his mother. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my house, public and safe with plenty of witnesses. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, maybe 20 pounds, and it made him look gaunt and hollow. His clothes hung loose on his frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hair needed cutting. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks, who'd aged a decade in 3 months. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse as he slid into the chair across from me. He ordered coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped his hands around the cup like he was trying to absorb its warmth. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was angry. For so long I was just angry. I thought I was finally free." The words came out broken, uncertain, like he was still trying to understand them himself. "Free from what, Liam?" I asked, and my voice was harder than I intended. "From a mother who paid for your education? Who bought your first house? From someone who loved you enough to sacrifice her own life after your father died to make sure you had everything?" I leaned forward. Or were you just free from having to be grateful? Free from having to acknowledge that you needed help? He flinched like I'd struck him. Good. Let him feel it. Let him understand that freedom gained through cruelty isn't freedom at all. It's just another kind of prison. You never trusted me! The words burst out of him, loud enough that people at nearby tables looked over. He lowered his voice, but the emotion remained. You made me feel like I'd fail without you. Every decision I made, you had an opinion. Every accomplishment, you found the flaw. You made me feel small and incapable, like I was still a child who needed his mother's permission to live his own life. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he wasn't trying to hide them. I felt like a hostage, Mom, like you were holding my whole life ransom, and the only way to be free was to... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. But I knew how it ended. The only way to be free was to hurt you. You're right, I said quietly, and his eyes snapped to mine in shock. I didn't trust you. After your father died, I was terrified of losing you too, so I held on too tight. I made you feel incompetent because I thought if you needed me, you wouldn't leave. I used money as leverage because it was the only power I had left. I was a terrible mother in so many ways, Liam. I know that now. I paused, letting him absorb that admission. But you didn't have to hate me for it, and you didn't have to let someone hurt me to prove you were free. You could have just left, set boundaries, built your own life. Instead, you turned your pain into permission for violence. He broke then, really broke, putting his face in his hands and sobbing with the kind of raw grief that makes people look away in discomfort. I'm so sorry, Mom, he choked out between gasps. I was so angry I couldn't see what Chloe was doing. She used my resentment, weaponized it. Every complaint I had about you she amplified. She made me believe you were the enemy, that hurting you was justice. And I let her. God, I let her because some part of me wanted it. He looked up, his face red and wet and destroyed. I let her use my resentment as a weapon because I was too much of a coward to face my own anger. I forgive you, Liam, I said. And I meant it. Not because what he'd done was okay, not because the betrayal didn't still ache like a physical wound, but because holding on to hatred would only poison what was left of my life. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen or that we can just go back to how things were. I reached across the table but stopped short of touching his hand. You made a choice. You chose her cruelty over my love. You chose to celebrate my pain instead of defending me. That's something we both have to live with now. Can we... He started, then stopped, struggling to find the words. Can we ever fix this? Is there any way back? I thought about that question for a long moment, watching my son's desperate face, seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he used to be. Maybe, I said finally, but not now, not yet. If you ever want to rebuild this, you'll have to prove you've changed, not with words or apologies, but with years of consistent action, with therapy, with taking responsibility, not just for what Chloe did, but for your part in enabling it. I stood, gathering my purse. I need to see that you understand the difference between resentment and abuse, that you can be angry with me without wanting me destroyed. He stood too, reaching out like he might hug me, then pulling back when he saw me tense. I do understand, he said. I know I failed you, failed Dad, failed myself. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Chloe knew about the trust clause, he said suddenly. Before the assault, she researched it, found some legal blog that mentioned moral conditions in trusts. She thought if we could hide what she did, or if I never acknowledged it publicly, we could get around it. She gambled that you'd stay quiet, that you'd protect me like you always had. He laughed bitterly. She didn't know you at all. Neither did I. I looked at my son, this broken, hollow version of the boy I'd raised, and felt the full weight of our mutual failures. I'd made him feel like a hostage, and he'd responded by becoming my enemy. Chloe had simply exploited the wound I'd created. Goodbye, Liam, I said softly. Maybe someday we can try again. But today, I need to leave. I walked toward the door, and this time he didn't call after me. I drove home through late afternoon traffic, tears blurring my vision, and thought about mirrors, how they show us truth we'd rather not see, how they reflect both our best and worst selves. Liam had looked in the mirror today and finally seen himself clearly. But some cracks, once made, never fully heal. They just become part of the landscape, permanent reminders of how badly we can damage the people we love. And sometimes, that's all forgiveness can offer. Not repair, but acceptance that the damage is real and lasting. And we have to learn to live with it anyway. In the end, I didn't destroy my son. I freed him from the lie that cruelty is strength, that resentment is justice, that silence is love. Whether he understands that, I may never know. But I do. 1 year after the verdict, I live in a small coastal town 3 hours from the city where I raised Liam. The house is modest, 2 bedrooms, a garden I'm slowly learning to tend, and a view of the ocean that makes me feel both small and infinite. I volunteer 3 days a week at a women's shelter called Safe Harbor, one of the organizations funded partly by the $2.7 million from Robert's Trust. The irony isn't lost on me. My husband's money, meant for our son, now helps women escape the kind of violence Liam enabled. Some days that feels like poetry. Other days it just feels sad. I've built a quiet life here, the kind I never thought I'd want. Book club on Tuesdays, where we drink wine and argue about whether the protagonist in our latest novel was justified in her choices. Painting classes on Thursdays, where I've discovered I'm terrible at landscapes but surprisingly decent at portraits. A garden that's teaching me patience as I wait for seeds to become flowers. I'm learning to be alone without being lonely, to find peace in silence rather than seeing it as emptiness. My days are small now, contained, but they're mine. No one controls them, no one judges them. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, I've started to feel like myself again, not the woman I was before the assault, but someone new, someone who survived. Liam writes every few months. Letters, not emails, actual handwritten letters on cream-colored stationery that arrive in my mailbox, like artifacts from another era. The first one came 6 weeks after our coffee shop meeting. It was 3 pages long, full of apologies and self-recrimination and promises to do better. I read it twice, cried, and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond for a month. When I finally did, my letter was shorter, polite, distant, acknowledging his pain but making no promises about our future. We've settled into this rhythm now, he writes. I respond occasionally. The relationship is cordial in the way relationships between distant acquaintances are cordial. Rebuilding will take years, if it happens at all. Some days I think it might, other days I know it won't. And I've made peace with both possibilities. Last month, I bought a new mirror for my bathroom. I found it at an antique shop near the harbor, vintage, with an ornate gold frame and beveled glass that catches the light in unexpected ways. It's beautiful, the kind of mirror that makes you stop and look at yourself not out of vanity but out of genuine curiosity about who's looking back. I hung it myself, balancing on a stepladder and wielding a level with the kind of focused determination I used to reserve for controlling Liam's life. When it was finally straight, I climbed down and stood in front of it. The bruise is long gone, of course. The physical evidence of that morning in Chloe's kitchen disappeared months ago, but I still remember exactly where it was, can still trace the phantom outline with my fingertips. I studied my face. Older now, with new lines around my eyes and mouth, gray streaking through my hair that I've stopped coloring, but also wiser, freer, a face that belongs to someone who survived something and come out changed. Mark visited last week, driving down from Seattle where he's finally returned after his extended stay. We walked on the beach in the early morning when the sand was still cool and the tourists hadn't arrived yet. Do you regret it? He asked as we watched the waves. Fighting back? All the legal battles, the public exposure, losing Liam? I thought about that question for a long time, watching seagulls dive for fish. No, I finally said. I regret what I did to make Liam hate me. I regret being controlling, holding on too tight, making him feel like a hostage. I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I paused, bending to pick up a perfect spiral shell. But I don't regret refusing to be a punching bag, literal or metaphorical. I don't regret protecting myself, even when it cost me everything. At the shelter, I meet women who stayed silent. Women who made excuses for their abusers, who convinced themselves they deserved it, who believed love meant tolerating anything. I tell them my story, not as a hero or a cautionary tale, but as a survivor who learned too late that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, that walking away isn't abandonment, that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. Some of them look at me with hope, others with skepticism, a few with anger like I'm judging their choices by making different ones. I understand all of it. There's no single right way to survive. They ask me if I won. I don't know how to answer that. I lost my son, at least for now. I lost the family I thought I'd have in my old age, the grandchildren I'll probably never meet, the relationship I'd spent 35 years building. But I kept my dignity. I kept my life. And I learned that love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. It means knowing when to walk away, even when walking away breaks your heart. It means understanding that forgiveness and reconciliation aren't the same thing, that you can love someone and still refuse to let them destroy you. 2 weeks ago, the shelter received an anonymous donation, $10,000, wired from an account with no identifying information. The director asked if I knew who it might be from. I said I didn't, but I suspected. Liam. It's the kind of gesture he'd make, too afraid to reach out directly, still working on his own healing, but wanting to show that he's trying. It's not redemption, it's not even close to enough, but it's a start. A small step toward becoming the man his father hoped he'd be. Whether he gets there or not isn't my responsibility anymore. This morning, I stood in front of my new mirror and smiled. Not a triumphant smile. There's no triumph in losing your child, even when it was necessary for your survival, but a quiet, hard-earned smile that says, I'm still here. I survived. I'm free. The mirror shows me who I've become. Not the controlling mother who drove her son away, not the victim who stood at her birthday party with a black eye, but the woman who chose herself when no one else would. And that woman, scarred and imperfect and still learning, is someone I'm finally learning to love. If you've made it this far, I hope this story resonated with you. Please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between love and self-preservation? I read every comment and your stories matter. Thank you for being here.